The screech of tires on gravel echoed across the wheat fields as two luxury SUVs tore through Marcus Chen's farm for the third time that week. Behind the wheel, the Hartwell sisters, blonde, entitled, and absolutely certain the world owed them. A shortcut had no idea they were about to meet their match, a device that would teach these trespassers that some roads exact a price higher than they ever imagined. By sunset, their pristine vehicles would be bleeding black tears onto his soil, and the sisters would learn that karma sometimes comes with an instruction manual written in a... Marcus first heard the engines. He was replacing fence posts near the main road when two identical white Range Rovers came screaming down his private driveway, kicking up clouds of dust that settled like flour over his freshly planted seedlings. Marcus dropped his post-hole digger and jogged toward the house, his work boots crunching on the gravel. The first SUV barely slowed as it roared past him. In his direction, the second vehicle followed close behind, its driver identical to the first, like some twisted mirror image. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, waving his arms. "This is private property." The vehicles disappeared around the bend toward the back fields, leaving him standing in their dust cloud, coughing and furious. He pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff's office. "It's Marcus Chen. I've got trespassers." Again, ... Yeah, same as last week. Two white Range Rovers racing through my fields like they own the place. Marcus stood directly in their path, this time forcing them to stop. The first driver rolled down her window with obvious irritation. "Move," she said, her voice dripping with entitled impatience. "You're blocking the road." The woman was in her early 30s, with the kind of artificial perfection that money could buy but genuine character couldn't. "Are you seriously going to make us late over some dirt?" the second woman said. "We're the Hartwell sisters." Was the new gated community built on what used to be farmland, inhabited by tech executives and their families who treated the surrounding area like their personal playground. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Marcus said. "This is private property. Use the public roads like everyone else." The first sister, who wore a name tag that read Brittany, laughed. "The public roads add 15 minutes to our drive. We're already paying a fortune in property taxes. The least you locals can do is let us use your little dirt paths." "Local," Marcus's voice hardened. "You've been here, what, 6 months? Engine, we're going to keep using this route, whether you like it or not. Sue us." Before Marcus could respond, both vehicles peeled out, spraying gravel against his legs. He watched them disappear onto the county road, his hands clenched into fists. Man's Presence Wei Chen had passed 6 months ago, leaving Marcus the farm and a lifetime of memories. His phone buzzed. "Talked to the Hartwell sisters. They claim they have an easement through your property." "That's impossible. My grandfather would never." "I know." Marcus's blood ran cold. "My grandfather died 6 months ago. Property disputes are civil matters. You'll need to get a lawyer." After hanging up, Marcus walked to his grandfather's study. The old man had been meticulous about record keeping, every deed and contract filed in perfect order. Marcus spent 3 hours searching through documents, finding nothing that gave the Hartwell sisters any legal right to cross his land. The Range Rovers appeared at the end of his drive, slowing when they saw the obstacle. "Salary? You've got to be kidding me," Brittany said, hands on her hips. "A gate, really, really," Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. "Private property, remember." Cameron pulled out her phone. "I went through every document in my grandfather's files. There's no easement." The sisters exchanged glances. Brittany's confident expression faltered for just a moment before the arrogance returned. "A real estate agent handled all that," she said. "The paperwork is probably still processing, but we have a verbal agreement." "With who?" "My grandfather died before you even moved here. With the estate," Cameron said quickly. "The executor." Marcus straightened up, wiping his hands. "On his genes, I am the executor. I inherited this property outright. There is no easement, verbal or otherwise." The sisters' faces flushed red. Brittany stepped closer, her voice rising. "Look, we don't have time for this nonsense. We have a 9 a.m. spin class, and if we're late, we lose our spots. Move the gate, or we'll move it ourselves." "I'd like to see you try," Marcus said quietly. Cameron returned to her vehicle and came back with a crowbar. Without hesitation, she began attacking the gate's hinges while Brittany recorded everything on her phone. "You're committing vandalism," Marcus said, pulling out his own phone to film. "I'm calling the police. This is a civil rights issue." Within minutes, Cameron had damaged the gate enough to swing it open. Both sisters climbed back into their vehicles and roared through, leaving Marcus standing amid the wreckage of his morning's work. Objective valve stem cap from one of their tires apparently knocked loose during their hasty exit. Wei Chen had been a gentleman, but he'd survived World War II, the Cultural Revolution, and 40 years of farming in America. He'd learned patience, but also that sometimes patience wasn't enough. Some people, his grandfather had once said, only learn respect through consequences. The old man had been more than a farmer. He'd been an engineer before immigrating to America. In the back corner, covered by a tarp, inside the crate, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a device that looked like a combination of a garage door opener and a military radio. Attached was a manila envelope containing hand-drawn schematics and a letter in his grandfather's precise handwriting. The property disputes of 1987, when the highway department wanted to take our land through eminent domain, the years, pressure plates buried beneath the gravel surface. Connected to a system that can be ... persuasive, use it wisely, and only when all other options have been exhausted. Your grandfather. Wei Chen Marcus studied the schematics, his engineering background from college helping him understand the elegant simplicity of his grandfather's design, and its effects were both immediate and memorable. The next morning, Marcus was installing new security cameras when the Range Rovers appeared again. This time, they didn't even slow down for the repaired gate. They simply rammed through it, splintering wood and sending metal flying. As the vehicles disappeared around the bend, Marcus activated his grandfather's device for the first time. The display showed two sets of lights moving along the mapped route, their speed increasing as they approached the backfields. Then, suddenly, both sets of lights stopped. Marcus waited. His security cameras had a clear. 3 days after the Range Rover incident, Marcus was rebuilding his gate when a black Mercedes pulled into his driveway. The car moved slowly, respectfully, stopping well short of the construction area. A man in an expensive suit climbed out, briefcase in hand. "Mr. Chen." The man approached with the calculated confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation rather than force. "I'm Richard Blackwood, attorney for the Hartwell family." Marcus set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his work shirt. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been expecting you." "I'm sure you have." Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. "My clients have suffered significant financial damages due to your actions. Two Range Rovers, totaling over $180,000 in value, were completely destroyed on your property." "Destroyed?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I thought they just had mechanical problems." "Don't play games with me, Mr. Chen. We both know what happened here." Blackwood opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I have photographs, witness statements, and expert testimony that your property was deliberately sabotaged to damage vehicles." Marcus glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. Expert testimony about what, exactly? About the impossibility of simultaneous catastrophic failure in two separate vehicles without external intervention. Blackwood's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd made a career out of legal bullying. About the precise nature of the damage, indicating specialized knowledge of automotive systems. "Interesting theory," Marcus said. "Did your expert examine the vehicles?" "Of course." Both cars showed evidence of. Blackwood paused, consulting his notes. Multiple puncture wounds in the oil pan, transmission housing, and coolant system. The damage pattern suggests deliberate sabotage using military-grade equipment. Marcus almost laughed. His grandfather's device was many things, but military-grade wasn't one of them. The old man had built it from farm equipment and salvaged parts, relying on ingenuity rather than technology. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, "are you familiar with the concept of road hazards?" "Road hazards don't cause this kind of damage," Blackwood replied, "and they certainly don't cause identical damage to two separate vehicles. They do if both vehicles hit the same hazards at high speed." Marcus gestured toward his driveway. "This is a working farm. We have equipment, tools, and debris scattered. Around your clients were trespassing and driving recklessly on private property." Blackwood's expression hardened. "My clients were using what they believed to be a public thoroughfare. Based on what? A non-existent easement." "The easement exists," Blackwood said quickly. The paperwork was filed with the county recorder's office last month. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. I'd like to see that paperwork. Blackwood pulled out a manila envelope and handed it over. One copy of a perpetual easement agreement filed and recorded according to state law. Marcus examined the document, his engineering background helping him spot the inconsistencies immediately. The easement was dated 6 months ago, but it was signed by someone claiming to represent the Chen family trust, a trust that had never existed. This is fraudulent, Marcus said, looking up from the papers. My grandfather never signed this. He died before your clients even moved to the area. The signature has been verified by a handwriting expert, Blackwood replied smoothly. Mr. Wei Chen signed that document in the presence of a notary public. Marcus studied the signature more carefully. It was remarkably similar to his grandfather's handwriting. But there were subtle differences, the kind that might fool a casual observer. Mr. Blackwood, Marcus said slowly, are you aware that forging legal documents is a felony? Are you aware that vigilante justice is also a felony? Blackwood shot back. My clients have offered to settle this matter quietly. They'll drop their criminal complaint in exchange for a recorded easement and compensation for their damaged vehicles. Criminal complaint, destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and setting illegal traps on private property. Blackwood's smile returned. The district attorney is very interested in this case. Apparently, booby-trapping private property is a serious crime, even if the victims were technically trespassing. Marcus felt the walls closing in. If the Hartwells had managed to create convincing evidence of sabotage, and if they had a forged easement that appeared legitimate, he could be facing serious criminal charges. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. Simple. You grant a legal easement allowing my clients to use your driveway as a shortcut to the county road. In exchange, they'll pay for the damage to your gate and drop all criminal charges. And if I refuse, then we proceed with both criminal and civil actions. The criminal case will likely result in jail time, and the civil case will claim damages for the vehicles, lost wages, emotional distress, and punitive damages. We're talking about a lawsuit in excess of $500,000. Marcus looked at the forged easement, again noting the quality of the fabrication. Someone had invested significant time and money into creating this document, complete with fake notary stamps and county filing numbers. I need time to think about this, he said. Of course. But don't take too long. The statute of limitations on criminal charges is quite generous, but my client's patience is not. Blackwood closed his briefcase with a sharp click. I'll need your answer by Friday. After the lawyer left, Marcus sat on his porch, staring at the forged easement. The document was sophisticated enough to fool most people, but it contained one fatal flaw. It referenced a specific surveyor's map that Marcus knew had been updated after his grandfather's death. He pulled out his phone and dialed his own attorney, Sarah Kim, who had handled his grandfather's estate. Sarah, I need your help. Someone has forged an easement document using my grandfather's signature. Marcus, that's a serious accusation. Are you sure it's forged? Positive. The document references a survey map that didn't exist when my grandfather was alive. Can you meet me at the county recorder's office tomorrow? Of course, but Marcus, if someone has gone to this much trouble to create false documents, they're not going to give up easily. That evening, Marcus found himself back in his grandfather's workshop, studying the device that had started this whole mess. The old man's notes were meticulous, documenting every modification to the driveway over the years. But as Marcus read deeper into the files, he discovered something that changed everything. His grandfather hadn't just built a device to puncture oil pans, he'd built a comprehensive security system that recorded everything. Hidden cameras, audio recording devices, and motion sensors had been documenting activity on the property for over a decade. Every instance of trespassing, every conversation, every license plate number, all of it stored on a sophisticated digital system that his grandfather had maintained until his death. Marcus activated the playback system and began reviewing the footage from the weeks leading up to the Range Rover incident. What he found made his blood run cold. The cameras had captured the Hartwell sisters' first trespass, but they'd also recorded something else. A meeting between the sisters and a man in a county recorder's office uniform, taking place right on Marcus's property. The conversation was clearly audible. The easement will be backdated too before the old man's death, the official was saying. As long as you're sure he never filed any contradictory documents, we can make this look completely legitimate. We checked, Brittany Hartwell replied. The farmer's too stupid to know the difference, and even if he figures it out, it'll take months to prove fraud. What about the neighbor boy? Cameron asked. He inherited everything. That's why we need to move fast, the official said. Once he starts asking questions, this gets complicated. But if we can get him to sign off on the easement voluntarily, we're golden. Marcus felt a surge of anger as he watched the conspiracy unfold on his grandfather's security system. The county official was someone he recognized, deputy recorder who had worked for the county for over 20 years. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The cameras had recorded the sisters' final trespass, showing them deliberately ramming through his gate and driving recklessly through his fields. But they'd also recorded the aftermath, when both women had inspected their damaged vehicles. This is perfect, Brittany had said, examining the punctured oil pan. No way anyone can prove this was deliberate. It just looks like we hit something sharp. And our lawyer says the booby trap angle will work, Cameron added. Even if the farmer didn't sabotage the road, we can make it look like he did. Marcus had everything he needed to destroy their case, but he realized that simply defending himself wasn't enough. The Hartwell sisters had committed fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. The county official had committed bribery and falsification. Of records, they all deserved to face the consequences of their actions. The next morning, Marcus met Sarah Kim at the county recorder's office. She'd brought a handwriting expert and a document examiner, both of whom confirmed that the easement was fraudulent. The signature is close, the handwriting expert explained, but there are several indicators of forgery. The pressure patterns are wrong, and the ink composition doesn't match samples from the alleged date. More importantly, the document examiner added. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Marcus grateful to be alive and working his family's land. He was feeding the chickens when he heard the first sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached Mountain View Estates. By 7 a.m., his phone was buzzing with calls from neighbors who could see the FBI vehicles and local police cars converging on the gated community. Marcus let the calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on his morning chores and the satisfaction of knowing that justice was finally being served. The first real indication of how thoroughly the Hartwell sisters' world was collapsing came at 8:30 a.m., when Marcus received a call from Agent Torres. Mr. Chen, I wanted to update you on this morning's arrests. We've taken both Hartwell sisters into custody, along with their attorney Richard Blackwood and Tom Bradley from the county recorder's office. Marcus set down his coffee mug. All of them. The conspiracy charges are federal, but the local DA is also filing charges for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of property. This is going to be a long process, but I wanted you to know that your property rights are fully protected. What happens now? Now they get to explain their actions to a federal judge. The evidence you provided was comprehensive enough to secure warrants for their homes, offices, and financial records. We're discovering that this wasn't their first attempt at land fraud. After hanging up, Marcus walked to his grandfather's grave, located in the small family cemetery at the edge of the property. The old man's headstone was simple granite, engraved with his name, dates, and a single line in both Chinese and English. He protected what mattered. They're in custody. Grandpa Marcus said quietly, "Your security system worked perfectly." As he walked back toward the house, Marcus noticed a familiar car pulling into his driveway. Sarah Kim, his attorney, climbed out with a stack of newspapers and a grim expression. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, holding up the morning edition of the local newspaper. The headline read, "FBI arrests Mountain View residents in land fraud scheme." Below the headline was a photograph of Brittany and Cameron Hartwell being led away in handcuffs, their faces hidden behind designer sunglasses and expensive lawyers' business cards. "This is bigger than we thought," Sarah continued. "The FBI found evidence that the Hartwell sisters have been running similar schemes across 3 counties. They target elderly or recently deceased property owners, forge easements, and then either sell the access rights or use them to increase their own property values." Marcus read the article carefully, noting the details about the nature of the fraud ring. The sisters had apparently worked with Bradley and several other corrupt officials to create a pipeline of false documents, targeting properties that bordered wealthy developments. How many victims? Marcus asked. At least 15 that they've identified so far. Most of them were elderly farmers or recent widows who didn't have the resources to fight back. Sarah's voice carried a note of disgust. The FBI estimates they've stolen over $2 million in property value through these schemes. Marcus felt a surge of anger at the scope of the sisters' crimes. They hadn't just targeted him, they'd been preying on vulnerable people throughout the region, using their wealth and connections to steal from families who couldn't defend themselves. What about their real estate agent? Marcus asked. The one they claimed arranged the easement. Fictional, Sarah replied, part of their cover story. They handled all the fraudulent paperwork themselves, using Bradley's position at the county office to make it appear legitimate. Marcus received an unexpected visitor. A black sedan pulled into his driveway, and 2 men in conservative suits climbed out. The older man approached with the measured pace of someone carrying bad news. Mr. Chen, I'm Detective Robert Hayes, White Collar Crime Division. This is my partner, Detective Lisa Park. We're investigating the Hartwell case. Marcus shook their hands, noting the serious expressions on both faces. Agent Torres said the arrests went smoothly. They did, Detective Hayes replied, but we've discovered some complications. The Hartwell sisters have significant financial resources, and they've hired one of the most expensive defense firms in the state. What kind of complications? Detective Park spoke up. Their new lawyers are claiming that the sisters were the victims of a scam themselves. They're saying that Tom Bradley approached them with the fake easement and convinced them it was legitimate. Marcus felt a chill. That's ridiculous. I have recordings of them planning the fraud with Bradley. We know, Detective Hayes said, but their lawyers are arguing that the recordings were illegally obtained without proper warrants. They're trying to get all the evidence from your grandfather's security system thrown out. Can they do that? It's complicated, Detective Park admitted. Your grandfather's system was on his own property, so the recordings are probably admissible. But the sisters' lawyers are very good at finding technicalities. Marcus walked to his porch and sat down, feeling the weight of the situation. So, what are you saying? The sisters are going to fight every charge, and they have the resources to drag this out for years. But you have evidence of their crimes. We do, but having evidence and proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt are two different things. Their lawyers are going to argue that the sisters were innocent victims of a corrupt county official. That evening, Marcus sat in his grandfather's workshop, reviewing the security footage one more time. The recordings clearly showed the sisters planning their fraud scheme. But he could see how expensive lawyers might create enough doubt to confuse a jury. He was deep in thought when he heard a car approaching. Through the window, he saw a white pickup truck with the logo of a local news station. A woman with a microphone and a camera operator were walking toward his house. Marcus met them at the front door, recognizing the reporter from the local evening news. Mr. Chen, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about the land fraud arrests. Would you be willing to comment? Marcus considered the request. Part of him wanted to avoid the publicity, but another part recognized an opportunity to tell his side of the story. What kind of story? He asked. We're investigating how the Hartwell sisters were able to target so many victims over such a long period. Our research suggests that this conspiracy involved multiple county officials and possibly some state-level corruption. Marcus invited them inside, and over the next hour, he provided a detailed account of the sisters' harassment, their destruction of his property, and the discovery of the fraudulent easement. The reporter was particularly interested in his grandfather's security system and how it had captured evidence of the conspiracy. Mr. Chen, Jennifer Walsh said as they wrapped up the interview, what do you want people to know about this case? Marcus thought about his grandfather's words about respect and consequences. I want people to know that just because someone has money and connections doesn't mean they can steal from their neighbors. And I want other victims to know that it's possible to fight back. The story aired that evening, and by the next morning, Marcus's phone was ringing constantly. Other victims of the Hartwell sisters' schemes were calling, sharing their own stories of harassment and fraudulent easements. One caller was particularly heartbreaking, an elderly widow named Mrs. Patterson, who had lost access to her own driveway because of a fake easement that allowed the sisters to use her property as a shortcut to a golf course. I couldn't afford to fight them, Mrs. Patterson explained. Their lawyer sent me letters threatening to sue me for millions of dollars if I didn't comply. I was so scared I just gave up. Marcus felt a surge of anger at the sisters' cruelty. They hadn't just targeted property, they'd targeted people's sense of security and safety in their own homes. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus said, I want you to call Detective Hayes. Tell him your story. You're not alone in this. Over the next few days, Marcus became an unofficial coordinator for the victims of the Hartwell scheme. He provided contact information for the FBI and local police, helped connect victims with pro bono attorneys, and organized a support group for people who had been targeted by the sisters' fraud ring. The media attention had an unexpected consequence. It attracted the attention of a high-profile civil rights attorney named David Chen, no relation, who specialized in cases involving the exploitation of elderly and vulnerable populations. Mr. Chen, David said during their first phone call, I've been following this case closely. I'd like to organize a class action lawsuit against the Hartwell sisters and their co-conspirators. What would that accomplish? It would allow all the victims to seek compensation for their losses, and it would send a message that this kind of predatory behavior has serious consequences. Marcus agreed to serve as the lead plaintiff in the class action suit, and within a week, 15 other victims had joined the lawsuit. The financial damages were staggering. The sisters had stolen property access worth over $3 million through their various schemes. But the real victory came 2 weeks later, when Marcus received a call from Agent Torres with news that changed everything. 6 months after the sentencing, Marcus was repairing irrigation lines when he noticed a convoy of vehicles approaching his farm. 3 news vans, 2 police cars, and a black SUV with government plates pulled into his driveway. The lead officer, a woman in a crisp uniform, approached with a folder in her hands. Mr. Chen, you could say that Captain Rodriguez gestured toward the SUV, where 2 federal agents were emerging. The FBI has discovered that Tom Bradley's corruption goes much deeper than we initially thought. Agent Torres approached, her expression grim. Marcus, we've found evidence that Bradley was part of a statewide network of corrupt officials. The Hartwell case was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next hour, Marcus learned the shocking scope of the conspiracy. Bradley had been working with officials in 12 counties, creating fraudulent easements, falsifying property records, and facilitating land grabs worth over $20 million. The network had been operating for nearly a decade, targeting hundreds of vulnerable property owners. How many people were involved? Marcus asked. At least 30 county officials, 15 real estate attorneys, and dozens of wealthy buyers who knew they were purchasing stolen property rights. Agent Torres replied, It's the largest property fraud scheme in state history. Captain Rodriguez opened her folder, revealing photographs and documents. What's particularly disturbing is how they selected their victims. They specifically targeted elderly farmers, recent widows, and immigrants who might not understand the legal system. Marcus felt sick as he reviewed the evidence. The conspiracy had been methodical and cruel, designed to prey on the most vulnerable members of society. His grandfather's situation hadn't been unique, had been part of a calculated pattern of exploitation. The good news, Agent Torres continued, is that your security footage and documentation have become the cornerstone of our entire investigation. Without your willingness to come forward, hundreds of victims would never have seen justice. The media attention that followed was intense. Marcus found himself at the center of a story that reached national news outlets, with reporters calling him everything from a hero farmer to a guardian of justice. The attention was uncomfortable, but Marcus recognized its importance in encouraging other victims to come forward. 3 days after the press conference, Marcus received a phone call that changed his perspective on the entire situation. Mr. Chen, this is Elena Vasquez. I saw your story on the news, and I think your grandfather helped save my family's farm. Marcus listened as Elena explained her situation. Her elderly parents had been targeted by the fraud network 5 years earlier, but they had resisted giving up their property rights. The harassment had escalated to the point where corrupt officials had threatened to condemn their land for public use. Your grandfather appeared at the county meeting, Elena continued. He spoke for 20 minutes about property rights and the importance of protecting family farms. He brought documents, legal precedents, and even offered to help my parents find an attorney. The officials backed down. They claimed there had been a misunderstanding and dropped their condemnation proceedings. But now, I understand what really happened. Your grandfather exposed their scheme before they could complete it. That evening, Marcus walked to his grandfather's grave, carrying a printout of Elena's story and dozens of similar emails that had arrived throughout the day. The old man had apparently been fighting the corruption network for years, using his engineering background and legal knowledge to help other families protect their land. "You were fighting this battle long before I knew it existed," Marcus said quietly, "and you were winning." As Marcus read through the stories, he began to see the full picture of his grandfather's quiet crusade. The old man had attended county meetings, filed legal challenges, and provided assistance to dozens of families facing fraudulent land grabs. His security system hadn't just been about protecting his own property, had been about gathering evidence of a much larger conspiracy. The revelation explained why the Hartwell sisters had been so confident in their scheme. They had targeted Marcus specifically because they believed his grandfather's death had removed their primary opponent. What they hadn't counted on was the old man's final gifta: security systems sophisticated enough to document their crimes, and a grandson stubborn enough to see justice done. 2 weeks later, Marcus received an invitation that surprised him. The state attorney general's office was hosting a ceremony to honor victims and witnesses in the land fraud case, and they wanted Marcus to receive a special recognition award. The ceremony took place in the state capitol, with over 100 victims and their families in attendance. Marcus sat in the front row, wearing his grandfather's best suit and feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the tragedy and recovery surrounding him. Attorney General Patricia Williams spoke passionately about the importance of ordinary citizens standing up to corruption. The criminals in this case believed that wealth and connections placed them above the law. They were wrong. They underestimated the courage and determination of people like Marcus Chen, who refused to be intimidated. When Marcus's name was called, he walked to the podium with a speech he had prepared about his grandfather's legacy. But as he looked out at the audience, dozens of elderly farmers, immigrant families, and working-class people who had nearly lost everything to the fraud network, he set aside his notes and spoke from the heart. "My grandfather used to say that respect is earned, but sometimes it must be taught." Marcus began. He paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Every person in this room could have been alone in their fight, but instead, we stood together. The applause was sustained and emotional, but Marcus wasn't finished. "The criminals who targeted us made a fundamental mistake. They saw elderly farmers and immigrants as easy victims. They didn't realize they were attacking the backbone of this country, people who built communities, fed families, and passed down values that money can't buy." As Marcus returned to his seat, he noticed something remarkable. The victims weren't sitting separately by county or case. They had formed a natural community, sharing stories and contact information. The trauma of their experience had created bonds that would last long after the legal proceedings ended. After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by a young woman with a notebook and a determined expression. "Mr. Chen, I'm Jessica Martinez, investigative reporter for the Washington Post. I'm working on a book about the land fraud network. Would you be willing to share your grandfather's story?" Marcus considered the request. The idea of national attention was daunting, but he recognized the importance of documenting what had happened. "What kind of book?" he asked. "A comprehensive look at how rural communities fight back against corporate and government corruption problems." Marcus agreed to participate, and over the next several months, he worked with Jessica to document not just the events of the past year, but the full scope of his grandfather's quiet resistance to the fraud network. The research revealed that way Chen had been far more than a simple farmer. His engineering background, combined with his immigrant's understanding of bureaucratic manipulation, had made him uniquely qualified to recognize and document the corruption scheme. "Your grandfather left behind a paper trail that spans 15 years, Jessica explained during one of their interviews. "He documented every suspicious land transaction, every irregular county meeting, and every instance of official misconduct. His files read like a masterclass in investigative journalism." The book, titled "The Last Farmer: One Man's War Against Rural Corruption," was published 18 months later and became a bestseller. But more importantly, it inspired similar investigations in rural communities across the country, leading to the exposure of fraud networks in over a dozen states. Marcus used his share of the book proceeds to establish the Wei Chen Foundation, which provided legal assistance to rural families facing property disputes and government corruption. The foundation's first case involved helping a community of immigrant farmers who were being targeted by a scheme similar to the one the Hartwell sisters had operated. 3 years after the original arrests, Marcus received a letter that brought the story full circle. It was from Brittany Hartwell, written from federal prison, Mr. Chen. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what my sister and I did to you and the other families we hurt. We convinced ourselves that everyone was playing the same game, that cutting corners and exploiting others was just how business worked. We were wrong. 5 years after the first Range Rover incident, Marcus stood before a crowd of 200 people gathered in the newly constructed Wei Chen Community Center. The building sat on land that had once been threatened by fraudulent seizure property. That was now permanently protected as a community space for rural families facing legal challenges. My grandfather used to say that respect is earned, but sometimes it must be taught. Marcus began, looking out at the diverse audience of farmers, legal advocates, and government officials. What he didn't tell me was that sometimes the teaching never ends. In the front row sat Alina Vasquez, whose family farm had been saved by Wei Chen's intervention years earlier. Beside her was Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who had found her voice again after the Hartwell case. Scattered throughout the crowd were dozens of other families whose lives had been touched by the foundation's work. Marcus gestured toward a wall display showing the foundation's accomplishments. 127 families assisted, $8.2 million in fraudulent claims defeated, and 15 corruption networks exposed across 12 states. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real victory isn't in the cases we've won, Marcus continued. It's in the communities we've built and the courage we've found in each other. The community center represented the culmination of 5 years of growth and change. What had started as a simple property dispute had evolved into a national movement for rural justice. The Wei Chen Foundation had become a model for grassroots legal advocacy, inspiring similar organizations across the country. But the day's celebration was bittersweet. Marcus had received news that morning that would change everything. Foundation had been awarded a $50 million federal grant to expand its operations nationwide. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant leaving the farm to establish headquarters in Washington, D.C. After the ceremony, Marcus walked alone through the fields where his grandfather had spent decades building their legacy. The land looked the same as it had 5 years ago, but everything else had changed. The farm was now managed by a cooperative of local families, ensuring it would continue to feed the community while serving as a symbol of resistance to corruption. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Martinez, the reporter who had written the book about his grandfather's story. Congressional hearing tomorrow on the Rural Protection Act. Your testimony could make the difference. The Rural Protection Act was federal legislation inspired by the Wei Chen case, designed to create stronger penalties for property fraud and better protections for vulnerable landowners. Marcus's testimony would be crucial in convincing lawmakers to support the bill. As the sun set over the farm, Marcus made his decision. He would go to Washington, not as an abandonment of his grandfather's legacy, but as its ultimate expression. The old man had protected this small piece of land, but Marcus could protect thousands of similar properties across the nation. That evening, Marcus held a farewell dinner for the families who had worked the farm with him over the past 5 years. The dining room was filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of genuine community that his grandfather had always valued above profit. You know, said Tom Rodriguez, one of the cooperative members, your grandfather would be proud of what you've built here. Marcus looked around the table at the faces of people who had become like family to him. He'd be proud of what we've all built together. The next morning, Marcus packed his grandfather's journals, the original security device, and a small bag of soil from the farm. As he prepared to leave for Washington, he was surprised by a knock at the door. Standing on his porch was Cameron Hartwell, looking very different from the entitled woman who had terrorized his driveway 5 years earlier. She was thinner, dressed simply, and carried herself with a humility that would have been unimaginable in her previous life. Mr. Chen, she said quietly, I know I have no right to be here, but I wanted to speak with you before you left for Washington. Marcus studied her face, seeing genuine remorse where arrogance had once lived. "How did you know I was leaving? I've been following the Foundation's work. And I've been working with a re-entry program that helps former inmates make amends to their victims." Cameron's voice was steady but emotional. "I wanted to tell you that I understand now what my sister and I destroyed, and I want to help rebuild it." She pulled out a thick envelope from her jacket. "This contains every document I can remember about our fraud schemes, plus contact information for victims we hurt who might not know about the Foundation yet. And this," Cameron handed him a cashier's check for $250,000. "It's everything I have left after restitution and legal fees. I want it to go to the Foundation to help the families we hurt." Marcus looked at the check, then at Cameron's face. The transformation was remarkable, but he needed to understand if it was genuine. "Why now?" he asked. "You've been out of prison for a year. Why wait until today?" "Because I wanted to make sure I was doing this for the right reasons," Cameron replied. "Not for forgiveness or to make myself feel better, but because it's what needs to be done." She paused, looking out at the farm that had been the site of her family's downfall. "Your grandfather's security system recorded more than just our crimes, it recorded our character, or lack thereof. I've spent 5 years thinking about the person I saw in those recordings, and I never want to be that person again." Marcus invited her inside, and over the next hour, Cameron shared her story of transformation. Prison had stripped away her entitlement and forced her to confront the real impact of her actions. She had earned a paralegal certificate and was now working with legal aid organizations to help low-income families facing property disputes. "Brittany chose a different path," Cameron admitted. "She's still angry, still blaming everyone else for what happened. But I realized that anger was just another form of the entitlement that got us into trouble in the first place." As Cameron prepared to leave, she turned back one final time. "Mr. Chen, I can't undo what my sister and I did to you and the other families, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That's my real penance." Marcus watched her drive away in a modest sedan that was a far cry from the Range Rovers that had started this whole saga. Her transformation was evidence of something his grandfather had always believed, that people could change, but only if they were willing to accept the consequences of their actions and learn from them. 2 days later, Marcus stood before the House Judiciary Committee in Washington, D.C., preparing to deliver the most important testimony of his life. The committee room was packed with lobbyists, advocates, and media representatives, all waiting to hear his case for the Rural Protection Act. Chairman Morrison, members of the committee, Marcus began, 5 years ago. "My family's farm was attacked by criminals who believed that wealth and connections placed them above the law. Today, I'm here to ask you to ensure that no other family faces the same threat." Marcus told the story of his grandfather's quiet heroism, the Hartwell sisters' fraud scheme, and the national network of corruption that had been exposed through their case. But he also talked about something more important, the communities that had formed in response to these attacks, and the ordinary people who had found extraordinary courage when they stood together. "The Rural Protection Act isn't just about punishing criminals," Marcus explained. "It's about empowering communities to protect themselves and ensuring that justice doesn't depend on how much money you can afford to spend on lawyers." The committee members asked pointed questions about implementation, cost, and effectiveness. Marcus answered them all, drawing on 5 years of Foundation experience and his grandfather's lifetime of wisdom. But the moment that sealed the legislations, fate came when Congressman Michael Torres asked a simple question. "Mr. Chen, what would your grandfather think about you being here today?" Marcus thought about the old man's journey from war-torn China to American farmland, about his quiet battles against corruption, and about the security system that had become the foundation for a national movement. "He would say that this is what America is supposed to be," Marcus replied. "A place where ordinary people can stand up to powerful interests and win, where character matters more than wealth, and where respect is earned through integrity, not taken through force." Rural Protection Act passed the House by a margin of 287 to 148, and was signed into law 6 months later. But for Marcus, the real victory was in the letters that arrived daily at the Foundation's new headquarters, stories of families who had been empowered to fight back against corruption, communities that had found their voice, and individuals who had discovered the courage to do what was right. 10 years after the first Range Rover incident, Marcus returned to the farm for the annual Wei Chen Memorial Celebration. The event had grown into a regional gathering, with hundreds of families sharing food, stories, and strategies for protecting their communities. As the sun set over the fields his grandfather had protected, Marcus walked to the old man's grave, carrying a copy of the latest foundation report. The numbers were impressive: over 500 families assisted, $15 million in fraudulent claims defeated, and 25 states with strengthened property protection laws. "The work continues, Grandpa Marcus," said Quietel.